The mop hit the marble floor with the same rhythm it always did. Back and forth, back and forth. Elena had cleaned this hallway so many times she could probably do it with her eyes closed. The fancy concert hall smelled like expensive perfume and floor polish, a combination she'd gotten used to over the past 3 years. Nobody really looked at janitors. Elena knew this better than anyone. She'd push her yellow cleaning cart past men in tuxedos and women in glittering dresses, and they'd step around her like she was a piece of furniture. Sometimes they'd be mid-conversation and wouldn't even pause. She might as well have been invisible, and honestly, most days Elena preferred it that way. At 28 years old, she'd learned to keep her head down and do her job. She arrived at Riverside Concert Hall every evening at 6, just as the staff was preparing for whatever performance was scheduled that night. She'd clean the bathrooms, empty the trash, vacuum the carpets in the lobby. By midnight, when everyone had gone home, she'd lock up and catch the last bus back to her apartment. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. Barely. Elena tied her dark hair back into a ponytail and wiped the sweat from her forehead. Her blue maintenance uniform was 2 sizes too big, handed down from someone who'd quit before her. The pants dragged on the ground and she'd safety pinned the waist to keep them from falling. Her old sneakers had holes in them, but new ones would have to wait until next month's paycheck. The sound of expensive shoes clicking on marble made her look up. A man in a perfectly tailored suit was walking toward her, talking rapidly on his phone. He had that look about him, the kind of person who'd never worried about money a day in his life. His watch probably cost more than Elena made in 6 months. No, that's not acceptable, he was saying into his phone. I don't care if she's sick. We have 300 people coming to this gala, and they're expecting world-class entertainment. Elena moved her mop bucket to the side, making room for him to pass. He didn't even glance at her. Just walked right by, still barking orders into his phone. Find me another pianist. I don't care where you have to look. Just make it happen. She watched him disappear around the corner, probably heading to his fancy office upstairs. That must be the new artistic director everyone had been talking about. What was his name? Richard something. He'd only been here a week and already half the staff couldn't stand him. Elena went back to mopping, but she couldn't help overhearing the conversation between 2 ushers who were setting up programs in the lobby. Did you hear? The pianist for Friday's gala canceled, one of them said. You're kidding. That's in 3 days, I know. Richard is losing his mind. This was supposed to be his big debut event, and now he doesn't have his star performer. Elena kept her head down and kept working. Not her problem. She just had to make sure the floors were clean and the bathrooms had enough toilet paper. What happened on stage wasn't her concern, but still a tiny part of her felt something. A flutter in her chest, a memory trying to surface. She pushed it back down where it belonged. By 9 o'clock, the evening's concert had started. Elena could hear the muffled sound of an orchestra playing through the walls as she cleaned the administrative offices on the 2nd floor. She'd timed her routine perfectly over the years. She knew exactly which areas would be empty during performances and which ones she needed to avoid. Richard's office door was open, and Elena peeked inside before entering. Empty. Good. She could clean quickly and get out. The office was ridiculous. Huge mahogany desk, leather chairs, walls covered with photos of famous musicians. Everything screamed money and status. Elena emptied his trash can and was about to leave when something on his desk caught her eye. It was a program for Friday's gala. The headline performer's name had been crossed out in angry red pen. Below it, someone had scribbled, "Need replacement ASAP." Elena's eyes drifted down to the piece they were supposed to perform. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew that piece. Knew it in her bones, in her fingers, in the deepest part of her soul. She'd performed it once, a lifetime ago, when she was just a kid with dreams bigger than the sky. Elena shook her head and backed out of the office. No, she wasn't going there. That part of her life was over. Buried so deep it might as well have never existed. She finished her rounds quickly, trying to ignore the music still echoing through the building. But tonight it was harder than usual. The melodies followed her from room to room, stirring up feelings she'd worked hard to forget. By 11:30, the concert had ended and people were filing out. Elena waited in a supply closet until the crowd thinned. She hated this part, having to navigate through well-dressed people who looked at her like she was dirt under their shoes. If she looked at them at all. When the lobby finally cleared, Elena emerged with her cart. Just a few more things to do and she could go home. But as she passed by the main auditorium, she stopped. The doors were open just a crack, and through them she could see the stage. The grand piano sat there under a single spotlight, majestic and beautiful. Elena looked around. Nobody was nearby. The security guard was making his rounds on the other side of the building. Everyone else had gone home. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. She pushed through the doors and walked down the center aisle. Her footsteps echoed in the empty space. The auditorium could hold 800 people, but right now it was just her and the piano. Elena climbed the steps to the stage, her heart pounding. She shouldn't be here. This was against the rules. If anyone caught her, she'd be fired on the spot. But the piano called to her like it always did on these lonely nights. She sat down on the bench and lifted the lid, revealing the pristine ivory and ebony keys. Her fingers hovered over them, trembling. How long had it been? 12 years? 13? Elena closed her eyes and let her hands drop onto the keys. The first notes came out tentative, uncertain. But then muscle memory took over, and suddenly she was 12 years old again, performing at her first competition. She was 16, winning scholarships and dreaming of conservatories. She was herself before life had beaten those dreams out of her. The music poured out of her, all the sadness and loss and longing she'd been carrying for over a decade. Her fingers flew across the keys, playing a piece she hadn't practiced in years but somehow still knew by heart. She didn't hear the door open behind her, didn't notice the figure standing in the shadows. Watching with wide eyes and an expression of complete shock, Elena just played, lost in the only moment of freedom she'd felt in years, not knowing that everything was about to change. Elena's alarm went off at 5 in the morning, just like it did every day. She slapped it silent and stared at the ceiling of her tiny studio apartment. The paint was peeling in one corner, and she could hear her neighbor's TV through the thin walls. She dragged herself out of bed and looked in the mirror. Dark circles under her eyes. She hadn't slept well. She never did after playing the piano. It always stirred up too many memories, too many what-ifs that kept her awake until dawn. The apartment was barely big enough for one person. A bed in one corner, a small kitchen area with a hot plate and a mini fridge, a bathroom so cramped she had to squeeze past the toilet to reach the shower. But it was hers, and more importantly, it was paid for. On the wall hung a single photograph in a cheap frame. Elena, age 12, standing on a stage with a trophy almost as big as she was. Her parents stood on either side of her, beaming with pride. Her mother's eyes sparkled with tears of joy. Her father had his hand on her shoulder, looking at her like she'd hung the moon. Elena turned away from the photo. She couldn't look at it for too long. She made instant coffee and ate toast for breakfast, the same thing she ate every morning. Then she caught the bus across town to her day job at a laundromat. That's right, she worked 2 jobs. The concert hall paid for rent, and the laundromat paid for everything else. Food, bills, the money she sent to her mother every month. At the laundromat, Elena folded other people's clothes and tried not to think about the piano. But it was impossible. Her fingers kept twitching, playing invisible keys on the countertop. "You okay, hun?" Mrs. Chen, her boss, asked around noon. "Yeah, just tired. You work too hard. Young woman like you should be out having fun, not working 2 jobs." Elena forced a smile. "Bills don't pay themselves." Mrs. Chen shook her head but didn't push. She was a good boss, one of the few people in Elena's life who treated her like a human being rather than just a pair of hands to do work. The day dragged on. By the time Elena's shift ended at 5, her feet ached and her back hurt, but she couldn't go home. She had to catch the bus straight to the concert hall for her evening shift. On the bus, she closed her eyes and let herself remember. Not the good parts, those hurt too much. But the in-between parts, the ones that explained how she'd ended up here. She'd been special once. Everyone said so. At age 7, she'd taught herself to play piano by ear, picking out melodies she heard on the radio. Her parents, who'd immigrated from Mexico with almost nothing, had scraped together enough money for lessons. Her teacher, Mr. Hoffman, an elderly man who'd once played with orchestras in Europe, said she had a gift. Not just talent, anyone could have talent. Elena had something deeper. When she played, she made people feel things. The competition started when she was 10. Local ones at first, then regional, then national. She won almost all of them. By age 14, she was being courted by fancy music schools. Full scholarships, a future so bright it almost blinded her, and then everything fell apart. Elena opened her eyes as the bus pulled up to her stop. She couldn't go down that road right now, not when she had floors to mop and toilets to clean. At the concert hall, things were even more chaotic than usual. People rushed past her looking stressed. She heard snippets of conversation as she got her cleaning supplies ready. Richard's still looking for a pianist. He's called everyone. Nobody's available on such short notice. If he doesn't find someone by tomorrow, the gala's going to be a disaster. Elena pushed her cart toward the bathrooms and started her routine. She wasn't going to think about it. Wasn't going to let herself care. But during her break, when she sat in the staff room eating a sandwich she'd made that morning, she couldn't help pulling out her phone. She Googled Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3, just to see what people were saying about it. The most technically difficult piece in the standard piano repertoire. One article said, "Only the world's greatest pianists dare to attempt it." Elena had performed it when she was 16. It had been her final competition before everything went wrong. She'd played it perfectly, with feeling and precision that had the judges on their feet. That was the same week her father died. He'd been working construction, sending money home so Elena could focus on her music. The scaffolding collapsed. He died instantly along with 2 other workers. The company had cut corners on safety equipment, but proving it in court would have cost more money than Elena's family had. Everything changed overnight. Medical examiners, funeral costs. Her mother fell apart, couldn't work for months. Elena's 2 younger brothers, only 8 and 10 at the time, needed someone to take care of them. The scholarship offers were still there. The future was still waiting. But how could Elena leave? How could she go off to some fancy school while her family was drowning? She'd made the only choice she could. She'd let it all go. "Hey, you're the cleaning lady, right?" Elena looked up. One of the ushers stood in the doorway of the staff room, looking at her like she was trying to remember something. "Yeah," Elena said carefully. "I thought I saw you last night, after the concert." "Were you on stage?" Elena's heart stopped. I was just cleaning up there, making sure everything was ready for today." The usher looked at her for a long moment. "Huh, okay. Just thought I heard music, but I guess I was imagining things." She walked away and Elena let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That was too close. She needed to be more careful. The rest of her shift passed in a blur. Elena kept her head down, avoided eye contact, did her job. By 10 o'clock, she was exhausted. Her whole body ached. She still had 2 more hours before she could go home. She was mopping the hallway near the administrative offices when she heard raised voices. Richard's door was cracked open and inside he was arguing with someone on the phone. "I don't care what you have to pay them. Find me someone who can play that concerto, or we're going to lose every major donor we have." There was a pause. "Yes, I know it's difficult. That's why we needed someone exceptional. That's why we hired someone months ago who apparently doesn't understand the meaning of commitment." Another pause. "Fine, keep looking. But we're running out of time." Elena heard something crash, maybe a phone being thrown at a wall. She quickly moved past the office, not wanting to be noticed. But as she pushed her cart down the hallway, something occurred to her. A crazy thought, an impossible thought. She could do it. She could play that piece. She knew it backward and forward, could probably play it in her sleep. But that was insane. She was a janitor. Nobody knew who she was. And even if she worked up the courage to say something, why would anyone believe her? Why would someone like Richard even listen to someone like her? Elena shook her head. It was a stupid fantasy, the kind of daydream that got people nowhere. She finished her shift and caught the last bus home. But all night, lying in her tiny bed in her tiny apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about it. The piano. The music. The person she used to be. Buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself that person had never existed. And somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, a question formed in her mind that she couldn't push away no matter how hard she tried. What if? The next evening, Elena arrived at the concert hall with her stomach in knots. She'd barely eaten all day. The what-if question had followed her everywhere, to the laundromat, on the bus, through every moment of her shift. What if she just told someone she could play? But every time she thought about actually doing it, panic set in. Who would believe her? She was a janitor in an oversized uniform with holes in her shoes. People like Richard didn't listen to people like her. They looked right through her. Besides, it had been 12 years. What if she couldn't do it anymore? What if her fingers had forgotten? What if she froze up in front of an audience? Elena pushed her cleaning cart through the lobby, trying to focus on work. But everything felt different tonight. The staff was running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Tomorrow was the gala, and apparently they still hadn't found a pianist. "This is a complete disaster," she heard one of the event coordinators say. "Richard's calling in every favor he has, but nobody's available. We might have to cancel." "We can't cancel. Do you know how much money we'd lose? Half these donors are coming specifically for the performance." Elena kept moving, kept cleaning, kept invisible. It wasn't her problem. It wasn't her life anymore. But then around 9 o'clock she found herself outside Richard's office. The door was open. He sat at his desk with his head in his hands, looking completely defeated. For the first time since she'd seen him, he didn't look arrogant or untouchable. He just looked scared. Elena's hand gripped her mop handle so tight her knuckles turned white. She could walk away right now. Finish her shift, go home. Forget this whole thing. Or she could step through that door and say something. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. "Excuse me," she said quietly. Richard looked up, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. "What?" Elena's voice came out smaller than she intended. I heard you're looking for someone to play tomorrow night." "And?" He looked at her like she was wasting his time. "I can play that piece. The Rachmaninoff." For a moment, Richard just stared at her. Then he laughed. Not a nice laugh. A dismissive, "Are you serious" kind of laugh. "You're joking, right?" Elena felt heat rising to her face. "No, I'm not joking. I've played it before. I can do it." Richard leaned back in his chair, looking at her like she was something strange he'd found on the bottom of his shoe. "You're a janitor." "I know what I am. Let me guess. You took a few piano lessons as a kid, and now you think you can perform one of the most difficult pieces ever written in front of 300 people? Elena's hands were shaking, but she forced herself to speak. "I competed nationally. I won scholarships. I was going to go to conservatory before." She trailed off. Richard's expression hadn't changed. He thought she was crazy. "Look," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I appreciate the enthusiasm, but I need a professional. Someone with credentials, not someone who played at a church recital once." "I can prove it," Elena heard herself say. "Let me play for you right now." Richard glanced at his watch. "I don't have time for this. You don't have a pianist. What do you have to lose? 5 minutes. Just give me 5 minutes." Something in her voice must have gotten through to him because he sighed heavily and stood up. "Fine, 5 minutes. But when you can't play it, I don't want to hear another word about this. Understood?" Elena nodded, not trusting herself to speak. What had she done? This was insane. They walked to the main auditorium in silence. Richard's expensive shoes clicked on the marble. Elena's worn sneakers squeaked. The contrast between them couldn't have been more obvious. The auditorium was empty and dark except for the stage lights. The piano sat there, waiting. Suddenly, Elena felt like she might throw up. "Well," Richard said, gesturing toward the stage. "Let's see what you've got." Elena climbed the steps on shaky legs. She sat down at the bench and stared at the keys. Her reflection looked back at her from the polished black surface of the piano. She barely recognized herself. What was she doing? She couldn't do this. She was going to embarrass herself and lose her job, and "Any time now," Richard called from the audience, checking his phone. Elena closed her eyes. She thought about her father, about how proud he'd been at her competitions, how he'd worked himself to death so she could have a chance at something better, how she'd promised herself she'd never touch a piano again because it hurt too much to remember what she'd lost. But maybe she owed it to him, just this once. Just to prove that all his sacrifice hadn't been for nothing. Elena placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes came out soft, almost tentative. But then something happened, something she couldn't explain. Her hands remembered what her mind had tried to forget. The music started flowing through her, and suddenly she wasn't in a concert hall anymore. She was 16 again, playing at the biggest competition of her life, feeling invincible. Her fingers moved faster, attacking the complex passages with precision and power. The piece was coming back to her like breathing. Every chord, every run, every subtle dynamic change. It was all still there, buried in her muscle memory, waiting to be awakened. She played through the most difficult section, the part that made even professional pianists nervous. Her hands flew across the keyboard, hitting every note perfectly. The music filled the empty auditorium, bouncing off the walls, filling every corner with sound. And then, just as suddenly as she'd started, Elena stopped. She'd played about 3 minutes of the piece, enough to prove her point. The silence that followed was deafening. Elena turned around slowly, afraid to look at Richard's face. Was he angry, annoyed, ready to fire her? He was standing now, his phone forgotten in his hand. His mouth was slightly open. He looked like someone had just slapped him. How? He started, then stopped. Where did you learn to play like that? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. I told you. I competed. For years. Richard walked down the aisle toward the stage. His expression completely changed. The arrogance was gone. Now he just looked stunned. Why are you working as a janitor? With talent like that, you should be. Life happened, Elena cut him off. She didn't want to explain. Didn't want his pity. Richard ran his hand through his hair, clearly trying to process what he'd just heard. I've heard professional pianists play that piece. What you just did was better than half of them. Elena didn't know what to say to that. Can you play the whole thing, tomorrow night, in front of an audience? And there it was. The question that could change everything. Elena thought about her tiny apartment, her 2 jobs, the safe little life she'd built where nobody expected anything from her. Where she couldn't fail because she wasn't trying to succeed. She thought about the photograph on her wall, her father's hand on her shoulder. She thought about the girl she used to be and the woman she'd become. Yes, she said, I can do it. Richard nodded slowly, like he was making a decision that terrified him. Okay. We'll need to get you something to wear. And we'll need to do a sound check. And he kept talking, listing all the logistics, but Elena wasn't really listening anymore. Because she'd just agreed to do something she'd sworn she'd never do. Again, she'd just agreed to step back into the life she'd left behind, and she had no idea if she was brave enough to go through with it. Elena didn't sleep that night. How could she? In less than 24 hours, she'd be standing on stage in front of 300 people, playing a piece she hadn't performed in over a decade. She sat on her bed at 3 a.m, staring at her hands. These hands that had scrubbed toilets and mopped floors for years. Could they really do this? Her phone buzzed. A text from Richard. Meeting at the hall at 10 a.m. Dress fitting at 11. Sound check at 2. Don't be late. Elena's stomach flipped. This was really happening. She somehow made it through her morning shift at the laundromat, though she dropped an entire basket of clean towels twice and put someone's red shirt in with their whites. Mrs. Chen kept giving her concerned looks. You sick? Mrs. Chen asked finally. No, just, I have something important tonight. More important than work? Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow, but she was smiling. Must be something special. Elena didn't know how to explain, so she just nodded. At 10 o'clock, she walked into the concert hall through the front entrance for the first time ever. It felt wrong, like she was somewhere she didn't belong. A security guard almost stopped her before Richard appeared and waved her through. There you are, he said, looking relieved. Come on, we have a lot to do. The next few hours were a complete blur. Richard introduced her to the sound engineer, the lighting director, the stage manager. Everyone looked confused about who she was. She could see them wondering why this woman in cheap clothes and worn-out shoes was suddenly so important. This is Elena, Richard kept saying. She's performing tonight. The dress fitting was even worse. A woman named Patricia from some expensive boutique downtown showed up with 3 dresses and garment bags. Elena had never worn anything that cost more than $50 in her life. Try this one first, Patricia said, holding up a long black gown that looked like it belonged in a movie. Elena changed in one of the dressing rooms backstage. The dress fit perfectly, hugging her body in all the right places before flowing down to the floor. She looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Oh, honey, Patricia said when Elena stepped out. You look beautiful. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. She couldn't remember the last time someone had called her beautiful. Richard nodded approvingly. That's perfect. We'll go with that one. I can't afford this, Elena said quietly. Don't worry about it, Richard said. It's taken care of. Elena wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't need charity, but Patricia was already packing up the other dresses. And honestly, Elena was too overwhelmed to fight about it. The sound check at 2 o'clock was when reality really hit. Elena sat at the piano on the empty stage with the sound engineer making adjustments. Richard sat in the audience listening critically. "Play through the opening," the engineer called out. Elena's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hit the right keys. The notes came out choppy and uncertain. Nothing like how she'd played the night before. "Stop, stop," Richard said, standing up. He walked down to the stage. "What's wrong?" "I don't know. I can't." Elena's voice cracked. "I can't do this." Richard sat down on the edge of the stage. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then, surprisingly, his voice was gentle. "You're scared. Of course I'm scared. I haven't done this in 12 years. What if I mess up? What if I freeze? What if everyone realizes I'm just a fraud who got lucky once upon a time?" "You're not a fraud," Richard said firmly. "I've worked in this industry for 15 years. I know talent when I hear it. What you played last night? That wasn't luck. That was years of training and natural ability. That was a long time ago. Muscle memory doesn't forget. Your hands know what to do. You just need to trust them." Elena wiped her eyes. "Why are you being so nice to me? Yesterday you thought I was crazy." Richard looked uncomfortable. "Because yesterday I was an arrogant jerk who judged you before giving you a chance. I do that a lot, actually. Judge people based on what they look like or what job they have. You're not the first person I've dismissed without really seeing them." He paused, looking out at the empty seats. "My father was a custodian at a university," he said quietly. "Worked there for 30 years. And you know what? He was the smartest man I ever knew. Read more books than most of the professors. Could discuss philosophy and history for hours. But people looked right through him because of his uniform." Elena stared at him, surprised by this confession. "I swore I'd never be like the people who dismissed my dad," Richard continued. "But somewhere along the way I became exactly that person. So I'm sorry for not seeing you, for walking past you like you didn't matter. You deserve better than that." For the first time, Elena saw Richard as a real person instead of just some rich guy in a fancy suit. He was flawed and complicated just like everyone else. "Thank you," she said softly. Richard stood up and brushed off his pants. "Now let's try this again. But this time, don't think about the performance tomorrow. Don't think about the audience. Just play the way you did last night. Play for yourself." Elena took a deep breath and placed her hands on the keys again. She closed her eyes and let the music come. This time it flowed more naturally. Not perfect, but better. They worked for 2 hours, going through difficult sections, getting the sound levels right, figuring out the timing with the orchestra. By the time they finished, Elena was exhausted but felt a little more confident. "That was good," Richard said. "Really good. Get some rest tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 6. Elena started to leave, but Richard called after her. "Hey, Elena." She turned back. "Whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know. You've already proven something important. You proved that you haven't lost it. That girl who won all those competitions? She's still in there. She never really left." Elena felt tears threatening again, so she just nodded and hurried out before he could see her cry. On the bus ride home, she called her mother. They hadn't talked in a few days, and Elena wasn't sure if she should mention tomorrow night or not. "Mia," her mother answered warmly. "How are you?" Mama, something happened." She told her mother everything. About playing the piano late at night. About Richard discovering her. About tomorrow's performance. When she finished, there was silence on the other end of the line. "Mama, are you there?" "I'm here, baby." Her mother's voice was thick with emotion. "You know what your father would say if he could hear this?" Elena's throat tightened. "What?" "He'd say it's about time. He'd say he always knew this day would come. That you were too good, too special to hide forever. I'm so scared, Mama." "Of course you are. But you're also brave. You've always been brave. You gave up your dreams for this family. And we never asked you to do that. Your father never wanted that. I had to take care of you, take care of the boys, and we love you for it. But Elena, we're okay now. The boys are in college. I'm healthy. We're going to be fine. It's your turn now. It's time to take back what you gave up." After they hung up, Elena sat on her bed and cried. Not sad tears, something else. Relief, maybe. Permission to want something for herself again. She looked at the photograph on the wall, her 12-year-old self holding that trophy, her father's hand on her shoulder. "I'm going to do it, Papa," she whispered. "I'm going to play for you. Tomorrow would be the biggest night of her life. Tomorrow would prove whether she still had what it took. Tomorrow everything would change." The day of the gala, Elena couldn't eat breakfast or lunch. She tried, but her stomach was in knots so tight she thought she might be sick. She arrived at the concert hall at 5 o'clock, a full hour before Richard had asked her to come. She needed time to breathe, to prepare, to convince herself she could actually do this. The hall was already buzzing with activity. Staff members rushed around setting up chairs, arranging flower displays, testing microphones. Elena slipped past them and made her way to the dressing room Richard had assigned her. Inside, the black dress hung on a rack, waiting. There was also a note on the table. "You've got this." Elena sat down and stared at herself in the mirror. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. What was she thinking? These people paid hundreds of dollars for tickets. They were expecting a professional, someone with credentials and experience, and, "Hey!" Elena jumped. Richard stood in the doorway dressed in an elegant tuxedo. "Sorry, didn't mean to scare you. Just wanted to check in. How are you feeling?" "Terrified," Elena said honestly. Richard stepped into the room and closed the door. "Want to know a secret? Everyone gets terrified. I've worked with pianists who've played Carnegie Hall and they still throw up before performances sometimes. That doesn't make me feel better." He laughed. "Look, here's what I know. You can play this piece. I heard you do it. The technical ability is there. So the only question is, are you going to let fear stop you from showing these people who you really are?" Elena looked down at her hands. "What if they hate it? What if I'm not good enough?" "Then they hate it," Richard said with a shrug. "But at least you'll have tried. At least you'll know you didn't let fear win." He checked his watch. "People are starting to arrive. The orchestra will be here soon. You should start getting ready." After he left, Elena sat in silence for a moment. Then she stood up and put on the dress. She fixed her hair, pulling it back into an elegant bun. She put on a little makeup. Not much, just enough to feel less terrified. When she looked in the mirror again, she saw someone different. Not the janitor who'd been invisible for 3 years. Not even the scared girl who'd given up her dreams. She saw a pianist. A performer. Maybe, just maybe, she could do this. At 7 o'clock, Elena stood backstage listening to the murmur of the crowd filling the auditorium. She peeked through the curtain and her heart nearly stopped. Every seat was full. Men in tuxedos, women in glittering gowns, people who looked like they belonged in magazines. And there, sitting in the third row, were her mother and her 2 younger brothers. They'd driven 3 hours to be here. Her mother caught her eye and smiled, pressing her hand to her heart. Elena felt tears starting and forced them back. Not now. She had to stay focused. The orchestra filed onto the stage, taking their seats. The conductor, a stern-looking woman named Helen, caught Elena's eye and gave her a reassuring nod. They'd run through the piece together that afternoon, and Helen had been impressed but cautious. "Just stay with me," she'd said. "I'll guide you through." Richard walked onto the stage to address the audience. Elena couldn't hear what he was saying over the pounding of her heart. Then she heard him say her name. "Please welcome to the stage Elena Rodriguez." This was it. No turning back now. Elena walked out onto the stage on legs that felt like rubber. The applause was polite but confused. She could see people whispering to each other, wondering who she was. Why wasn't she some famous pianist they'd heard of? She sat down at the piano and adjusted the bench. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together in her lap. She looked out at the audience, all those faces, all those expectations. Then she saw her mother again. Her mother was crying but smiling at the same time. She mouthed something. "I love you." Elena closed her eyes and took the deepest breath of her life. She placed her fingers on the keys. The opening notes came out soft and delicate. For the first few seconds, Elena was hyper-aware of everything. The audience, the lights, the orchestra waiting for their cue. But then something shifted. The music began to take over. Her fingers found their rhythm, moving across the keys with growing confidence. The melody she'd learned so many years ago came flooding back, not just as notes on a page, but as feeling, as emotion, as life. The orchestra joined in, and suddenly Elena wasn't alone anymore. She was part of something bigger, something beautiful. The music swelled around her and she let herself get lost in it. She played through the first movement, her fingers flying over the complex passages that had intimidated so many other pianists. But she wasn't thinking about the difficulty anymore. She was thinking about her father, about how proud he'd been, about all the sacrifices he'd made, about how he'd believed in her even when she stopped believing in herself. The second movement was slower, more emotional. Elena poured everything into it, all the pain of the last 12 years, all the loss, all the dreams she'd buried. Tears ran down her face, but she didn't stop playing. The piano became her voice, saying all the things she'd never been able to put into words. She could feel the audience leaning forward, completely absorbed. The whispers had stopped. Nobody was checking their phones or looking bored. They were with her, feeling what she felt, experiencing the music the way it was meant to be experienced. The final movement was fast and powerful, building to an explosive climax. Elena's hands raced across the keyboard, hitting every note with precision and passion. The orchestra rose with her, creating a wall of sound that filled every corner of the auditorium. And then, with one final triumphant chord, it was over. For a moment, there was complete silence. Elena sat frozen at the piano, not sure what had just happened. Had she messed up? Had it been terrible? Then the applause started. It wasn't polite applause. It was thunderous. People leaped to their feet, clapping and cheering. Some were crying. The orchestra members were tapping their bows against their music stands, the highest compliment they could give. Elena stood up on shaky legs and turned to face the audience. The applause got even louder. Her mother was sobbing openly, and her brothers were on their feet cheering. Richard stood in the wings with tears streaming down his face. He was applauding so hard his hands must have hurt. Helen, the conductor, came over and hugged Elena tight. "That was extraordinary," she whispered. The applause went on and on. Elena bowed once, twice, 3 times. People were still standing, still clapping. She'd never experienced anything like this in her life. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the curtain closed. Elena stumbled backstage, where Richard immediately wrapped her in a hug. "You did it," he said. "You absolutely did it." The next hour was a blur. People wanted to talk to her, shake her hand, ask where she'd trained and where she'd been hiding. Critics from major newspapers wanted interviews. Other concert halls wanted to book her. But the moment that mattered most came when her mother found her in the dressing room. They didn't say anything at first. They just held each other and cried. "Papa saw that," her mother finally said. "I know he did. He saw his baby girl shine." Elena nodded, unable to speak. "What happens now?" her mother asked. Elena thought about her tiny apartment, her 2 jobs, the safe little life she'd built, and then she thought about how she'd felt on that stage, playing music that came from her soul. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I think I'm ready to find out." 3 months later, Elena gave her 2 weeks' notice at both jobs. She'd been offered a position as a resident pianist at the concert hall, along with opportunities to perform at venues across the country. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to live on, enough to build a new life. She kept the photograph of her 12-year-old self on the wall of her new apartment. But now, when she looked at it, she didn't feel pain. She felt grateful, grateful for the gift her parents had given her, grateful for the chance to start again, grateful that sometimes when you think your story is over, you're really just at the beginning of a new chapter. And every time she sat down at a piano, Elena remembered that night. The night she stopped being invisible. The night she proved that it's never too late to become who you were always meant to be. The night she found her way home. 2 years after that night, Elena stood in front of a run-down community center on the east side of town. The paint was peeling, the windows needed cleaning, and the sign out front had half its letters missing. But none of that mattered. This place was about to become something special. "You sure about this?" Richard asked, standing beside her with a clipboard full of paperwork. Elena smiled. "I've never been more sure of anything." The building had once been a recreation center, but it had been abandoned for years. Elena had spent months searching for the perfect location, and when she'd found this place, she knew immediately it was the one. It was in a neighborhood where kids needed opportunities, where families struggled just like hers had. She'd used most of her savings and a loan from the bank to buy it. Richard had helped navigate the legal paperwork and had even contributed some money himself. But this was Elena's dream, and she was going to see it through. "The piano company is delivering 3 uprights next week," Richard said, checking his notes. "And we have 5 teachers lined up to volunteer. We just need to finish the renovations." Elena walked through the front door, her footsteps echoing in the empty space. She could already picture it. Kids sitting at pianos, learning scales, discovering the joy of music. Kids who might not be able to afford private lessons, but who deserved a chance to explore their talents. The Elena Rodriguez Music Foundation. That's what she'd named it. My father would have loved this, Elena said softly. Richard put his hand on her shoulder. I think he does love it, wherever he is. Over the past 2 years, Elena's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. After that gala performance, opportunities had come flooding in. She'd performed with orchestras in 5 different cities. She'd recorded an album that actually sold pretty well. Critics called her a revelation and proof that raw talent combined with genuine emotion can't be taught. But the money and the acclaim weren't what mattered most to Elena. What mattered was that she'd found her purpose again. She'd discovered that performing was only part of what she loved about music. The other part, the part she'd forgotten about, was sharing it with others. Teaching it, passing it on. 6 months ago, she'd started teaching piano lessons on the side. Just a few students at first, mostly kids from low-income families who contacted her through social media. She charged whatever their parents could afford, sometimes nothing at all, and that's when the idea had hit her. Why not create a place where any kid could learn music, regardless of whether their parents could pay? A place where talent mattered more than money. The community center would offer free music lessons to children and teenagers. Piano mainly, but eventually other instruments too. They'd provide instruments for kids to borrow, sheet music, even help with college applications for students who wanted to pursue music professionally. When do you want to open? Richard asked. September, right when school starts. That gives us 4 months to get everything ready. Richard whistled. That's ambitious, I know. But kids shouldn't have to wait. I waited 12 years to get back to music, and I don't want anyone else to lose that much time. The renovations took longer than expected. Of course they did. The electrical system needed updating. The roof leaked. The bathrooms were a disaster. Elena spent countless hours there, painting walls, installing new flooring, doing whatever she could to save money on labor. Mrs. Chen from the laundromat came by one Saturday with a crew of volunteers. You gave me excellent work for 3 years, she said. Time to return the favor. Elena's brothers drove down on weekends to help. Her mother came by with food, feeding the volunteers and making sure Elena actually ate something. Even some of the musicians Elena had performed with showed up to help. They painted, cleaned, moved furniture, whatever was needed. The classical music world could be snobbish and competitive, but Elena had discovered there were good people in it too. People who remembered what it was like to struggle, who wanted to give back. One afternoon in late August, Elena was on a ladder painting the front room when a woman walked in with a little girl who looked about 7 years old. Excuse me, the woman said. Are you Elena Rodriguez? Elena climbed down from the ladder, paint splattered and sweaty. That's me. I saw an article about this place in the newspaper. About the free music lessons. Is it really true? It is. We're opening next month. The woman's eyes filled with tears. My daughter has been begging for piano lessons for 2 years. But we can't afford them. I work 2 jobs already, and you don't need to explain, Elena said gently. She knelt down in front of the little girl. What's your name? Lily, the girl said shyly. Do you want to learn piano, Lily? The girl nodded enthusiastically. Well, we have a piano in the back room. Want to try it out? Lily's face lit up like Christmas morning. Elena led them to the small practice room where one of the pianos had already been delivered. She lifted Lily onto the bench and showed her middle C. Press this key, Elena said. Lily pressed it, and her eyes went wide at the sound. Now this one, and this one. Within minutes, Lily was picking out a simple melody, her little fingers finding the notes with surprising ease. Her mother watched from the doorway, crying quietly. She's got good instincts, Elena told the mother. Natural rhythm. I think she could be really good with practice. Really? Really? Why don't you sign her up? We have classes starting September 10th. After they left, Elena sat at the piano for a moment alone. She thought about herself at that age, just discovering the magic of music. She thought about all the kids like Lily who had talent and passion but no opportunity. This was why she'd come back to music. Not for the fame or the applause, but for this. For moments like the one she'd just witnessed. The opening day of the Elena Rodriguez Music Foundation was chaotic and beautiful. 50 kids showed up, way more than they'd expected. Parents filled out paperwork while children ran around exploring, their excitement filling the space with energy. Richard helped with registration while Elena gave tours. The local news even sent a reporter to cover the story. "Why is this important to you?" the reporter asked, sticking a microphone in Elena's face. Elena thought about how to answer. "Because I almost lost music forever. My family couldn't afford to keep me in lessons after my father died. And I thought that was the end of my story, but it wasn't. Someone gave me a second chance, and now I want to give that chance to as many kids as possible. Talent doesn't care about your bank account. Every child deserves the opportunity to discover what they're capable of." That clip played on the evening news, and the next day, the foundation received $20,000 in donations from people across the city, enough to buy more instruments and hire additional teachers. Elena hired 3 of her former classmates from her competition days, people who'd also struggled to make it in the classical music world. They understood what these kids were going through because they'd been there themselves. By October, the foundation had 70 students. By December 90, they had to add evening classes to accommodate everyone, and every week Elena taught at least one class herself. She loved seeing the kids progress, watching their confidence grow along with their skills. Some of them had real talent. Others just enjoyed making music. Both were equally important. One of her students, a 15-year-old boy named Danny, reminded her of herself at that age. He'd been teaching himself to play on a broken keyboard at home, learning from YouTube videos. When Elena heard him play, she knew immediately he was special. "You could go to conservatory," she told him after class one day. "You're good enough." Danny looked uncomfortable. "My family can't afford that. Scholarships exist. I'll help you apply. That's what this place is for." Danny's eyes filled with hope, the same hope Elena remembered feeling once upon a time. In February, the foundation held its first student recital. Elena invited everyone, parents, donors, local media, anyone who wanted to come. The kids were nervous but excited, dressed in their best clothes. When it was Danny's turn to play, he performed a piece by Chopin. Not perfectly, but with heart. The audience gave him a standing ovation, and Elena felt pride swell in her chest like she was watching her own child succeed. After the recital, Elena stood outside the community center watching families leave. Kids chatted excitedly about the performance. Parents thanked her with genuine gratitude. Richard came out and stood beside her. "You did it," he said. "You actually pulled this off." "We did it," Elena corrected him. "I couldn't have done this without your help. So what's next? World domination?" Elena laughed. "Maybe just opening a second location someday. But for now, this is enough. This is everything." She looked up at the sign they'd installed above the door. It was simple, just the foundation's name in clean letters. But to Elena, it represented something much bigger. It represented second chances. It represented the idea that your past doesn't define your future. It represented hope. That night, Elena went home to her apartment. Bigger now, but still modest. She sat at her own piano, the first one she'd owned in 15 years, and played for the pure joy of it. She thought about the janitor she'd been just 2 years ago. That woman who'd felt invisible, who'd given up on dreams, who'd forgotten who she really was. And she thought about the person she'd become. Not just a performer, but a teacher. Not just a musician, but someone making a real difference in her community. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Mija, I just watched the news. They showed your student recital. I'm so proud of you." "Thanks, Mama. Your father would be so proud too. You know that, right?" Elena smiled, tears in her eyes. "Yeah, Mama, I know." After they hung up, Elena sat in the quiet of her apartment and realized something. She'd spent years thinking her story had ended that day her father died, that she'd lost her chance at the life she was meant to have. But she'd been wrong. Her story hadn't ended. It had just taken a different path, and maybe, just maybe, this path was even better than the one she'd originally planned. Because now she wasn't just living her dream, she was helping others live theirs too. And that, Elena realized, was worth more than all the standing ovations in the world.